Scapegoat children must feel weakened to deserve compassion. Have you felt an invisible force holding you back from sustaining success? Do you feel empty or disoriented if you're not thinking about obstacles in your life? Has suffering played a big role in how you know yourself? Well, when a parent's love is in short supply, a child finds it in whatever way possible. This is particularly true for the scapegoat child of a narcissistic parent. The child finds contempt, control, and devaluation instead of compassion from this parent. This forces the child to figure out how to be treated better. The scapegoat child may learn that they are shown compassion only when they are in a weakened state. And by compassion, I mean a combination of empathy, concern, kindness, and consideration. This can lead the child to purposely get into weakened states in order to get needed compassion from their parent. And with enough time and reinforcement, the child can relate to themselves in this way too. In today's video, I start by describing how a narcissistic parent manipulates the scapegoat child to seek out weakened states. Next, I discuss how this causes the child to associate feeling weakened with deserving compassion. Last, I show how long-term therapy can help a scapegoat survivor safely let go of this association. And I'll use a case example to illustrate how one client gradually found it safe to feel strong without loss of compassion. My name is Jay Reed and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, and I specialize in helping people recover from narcissistic abuse. In my professional and personal experience, I've worked to identify the fundamentals to the process of recovery. And this has led me to what I call the 3 pillars of recovery. Pillar number 1 involves making sense of what happened so that you know it wasn't your fault. Pillar number 2 is gaining distance from narcissistic abusers and closeness with safer people. Pillar number 3 involves living in defiance of the narcissist rules. I think it's also essential to find and participate in communities of people who can get, validate, and support you on this path. Well, I've seen and experienced large improvements in quality of life after applying these pillars. And today's video falls under pillar number 3, living in defiance of the narcissist rules. If you were a scapegoat survivor of a narcissistic parent or partner, then I encourage you to check out my free ebook on the topic. It's called Surviving Narcissistic Abuse as the Scapegoat, and it goes into other important aspects of what it's like to be in the shoes of the scapegoat child or partner of the narcissistic abuser. Whether it's self-limiting beliefs about yourself that you have to adopt to survive, or why the narcissistic personality is so geared to put those closest to them down. I think and hope this ebook can help you realize how none of this abuse was your fault, but rather the product of the narcissist's own psychological and emotional problems. You can find the link to the book in the description box below or by clicking here. Well, if you find this content helpful, then I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. You can also follow me on Instagram and or TikTok under @JReedTherapy or Facebook under JReed Psychotherapy. The links are also in the description box below. When the narcissistic parent withholds compassion. A narcissistic parent holds a lot of power over their child. One of the levers this parent has is whether they show compassion towards the child or not. A child needs to feel compassion from their parent as much as they need oxygen. If a parent is conditional in their shows of compassion, then the child will adapt to those conditions. Well, let's first review the psychological dynamics at play in the narcissistic parent. A pathologically narcissistic person starts with a core sense of worthlessness that they cannot tolerate. And they manage these feelings by denying them, insisting on their opposite, and then pointing the finger outward. First, a narcissistic parent will deny to themselves and others that they lack self-esteem. Instead, they insist to themselves that they are worth more than others, not less than others. Then they find this intolerable worthlessness in someone else. A child regarded as the worthless one is known as the scapegoat to the narcissistic parent. And this all happens unconsciously. The narcissistic parent then influences the scapegoat child for the child to think of themselves as worthless. And when the scapegoat child believes they are undeserving or defective, then the narcissistic parent does not have to. This process of scapegoating a child in order to manage the narcissistic parent's self-esteem requires the child avoid feeling good about themselves. And we typically feel good about ourselves when we operate at full strength while feeling connected to others. A narcissistic parent can thwart such experiences by denying connection when the child is at full strength and providing it when the child feels weakened. This is a tragically effective way of preventing the scapegoat child from feeling good about themselves. An anonymized case example of withholding compassion when the child is strong. Well, again, this is a fictionalized example, but a client I'll call Lawrence remembered bringing home an A+ on his report card and excitedly telling his father about it. His father did not show compassion for Lawrence's excitement and pride in himself. Instead, his father looked at the paper and coldly told Lawrence to clean the garage before dinner time. Lawrence recalled feeling like the bottom had dropped out of his soul in that moment. He felt empty and despised himself for thinking that he was such a big deal. A child who is met with indifference when they hope for compassion will feel intense shame. The result over time is that the child will avoid displays of their strengths. Another anonymized case example of providing compassion when the child is weakened. Lawrence remembered his father sweetly offering words of solace only when Lawrence felt defeated in life. Lawrence remembered that in 8th grade he had a lot of friends. However, his father would always make it difficult for him to see these friends outside of school. Chores would suddenly appear that Lawrence had to do just as he was leaving to meet up with his friends. If Lawrence balked, his father would accuse him of caring more about his friends than about his family. Lawrence usually had to cancel his plans with his friends and devote himself to these chores. As a result of his continued unavailability, his friends gradually withdrew from him. His father then comforted him. As Lawrence expressed sadness over losing these friendships, he remembered his father saying, "I'm sorry you're feeling so bad. Well, those kids are just no good anyway. They don't deserve you as their friend." A child who does not find compassion when they feel strong will feel starved for it. If a narcissistic parent offers compassion when the child feels weakened, then the child will leap at it. The cost is the child's natural born right to live at the height of their own potentials. Instead, this child has to live in a compromised state to get what they need from the narcissistic parent. Why children need compassion? Well, as I mentioned earlier, compassion refers to the best things we can get in a relationship. The child who consistently finds empathy, concern, kindness, and consideration from a parent will enjoy a secure base from which to live. They will know that their existence is important to someone who's also very important to them, and they'll also get to know that they deserve compassion without conditions. Whether they are at their best or their worst, the child can find compassion from that parent often enough. It's available as needed. The absence of needed compassion from a narcissistic parent can traumatize the child. The child who has to go without compassion from a parent cannot feel like the protagonist in their own lives. They do not feel like anyone is genuinely rooting for them to be well. They can feel particularly vulnerable to self-criticism. They don't have a compassionate parent to comfort them when they can't meet their own expectations. So all of their frustration and anger towards themselves goes unfiltered, and they can feel emotionally beat up. At an existential level, the child without compassion can feel utterly alone and in the dark. Survivors of such forms of abuse describe an emotional no man's land they would encounter whenever they would feel strong. In the absence of their narcissistic parent's compassion during such moments, the child is left entirely on their own, Feeling compassion is integral to feeling loved. So in these moments, the child encounters the dreadful experience of feeling unloved. The cost of losing compassion when the child feels strong. Life can be tormenting for the scapegoat child who feels forbidden from feeling strong. The child may feel like their existence depends on them being sort of doubled over, like they are hooked up to a machine that offers compassion so long as they stay hooked up. The machine does not go with them. The child is not free to move about in the world. Another feature of this compassion machine is that the child must be kneeling on the ground in order to be hooked up to it. If the child stands up to their full height, the machine stops working. So the child finds times of being fully upright to be necessarily temporary, like a diver briefly taking off their oxygen mask when they're underwater. The scapegoat child lives in this dilemma. In order to spare themselves the unsurvivable state of finding no compassion, they must stay in a weakened state. Having to live in an unabated weakened state is its own form of torture. And when I refer to the scapegoat survivor's grit and resilience, I think this is one of the reasons why. Such individuals are able to bear this dilemma and stay in the fight to find an eventual resolution. They do not collapse under the weight of it. Well, let's go back to Lawrence. He found moments of success to be vexing. He remembered playing football at his high school and being on the second team. He was working extremely hard to make it to the starting team. He'd wake up before school and do wind sprints. He'd practice drills on the weekends. He felt bad about himself that he was not starting yet. Well, one practice, he was doing well in a drill, and his position coach took notice. He told Lawrence to take some reps with the starting team at his position. Lawrence made all of his assignments on these plays, and the head coach was impressed. He said, "Lawrence, you really showed me something today. I want you on the first team from now on." Lawrence was overjoyed in that moment. He'd always felt and hoped that he had what it took to start. Now he had what he had worked so hard to earn. As the halo of that moment wore off, though, he got home from practice and doubt began to creep in. He asked himself, what if the coach based his impression on a few lucky plays he made? What if he played terrible tomorrow? And he told himself, I don't really belong on the first team. He remembered feeling shaky and nervous as these thoughts overtook him. He had no one in his family that he could share his success with. He knew that his father would be completely disinterested, if not offended, at hearing about this. His mother and sister weren't involved in his life enough to get it. So he had to wrestle with this surge of feeling strong without compassion from those closest to him. At this point, Lawrence was feeling the consequences of having no compassion for feeling strong. He was disoriented, felt like a fraud, and found his pride impossible to sustain. His self-doubt served to return him to a weakened state where he felt deserving of his own compassion. He was a stranger to himself as a strong and capable football player. Therapy as a way for scapegoat survivors to find it safe to be strong. Therapy offers a relationship for the scapegoat survivor where they can find compassion when they are strong. A survivor who has had compassion withheld when they're strong will bring this expectation into therapy. And the therapist will collaborate with the survivor to bring awareness to this dynamic. All the while, the therapist's actual relational stance towards the survivor is one of ongoing compassion. So the survivor experiences the therapist's compassion when they feel weakened and when the survivor experiments with feeling strong. The survivor gets to find out that being shown compassion does not depend on them being weakened. This is a simple equation for change that can take a long time to take effect. After all, the scapegoat survivor has been threatened with the trauma of no compassion when they feel strong for years. And it often takes consistent and ongoing proof in the therapy that they no longer risk such danger when they feel strong in the therapy. Scapegoat survivors also work on their own behalf in therapy to heal themselves. So the survivor is often aware of the price they pay for having to live under this rule. They may find ways to test out whether this therapist will react to their expressions of strength in the ways the narcissistic parent did. And this often happens unconsciously. So if the therapist responds with compassion in these moments, then the survivor can find it safer to feel strong. Well, let's go back to Lawrence to illustrate this. He was in therapy in his early 30s, and Lawrence at that time owned his own business as a carpenter. His clients were all satisfied with his work. However, he was not completely booked with projects because he always put off marketing his business. One session, the following dialogue happened. Lawrence said, "I don't have any work 2 days this week." His therapist responded, "Well, what do you attribute this to? You've mentioned several times how satisfied your clients are with your work." Lawrence said, "That's just it. The people I've done the work for know that I do good work. Nobody else seems to know." His therapist said, "Isn't that where marketing comes in? I mean, reaching out to potential new customers to let them know the quality service you can provide them?" And Lawrence said, "I guess so. I've never been good at that stuff. Plus, I feel weird about it." The therapist said, "Weird?" Lawrence said, "Yeah, like, who am I to be showing off like that? It feels kind of undignified." His therapist said, "I hear you. I also wonder if some of your reluctance to market your business is part of a way you used to have to protect yourself from your father. You know, as we've discussed, he showed you no compassion when you were at full strength, but he did when you seemed or felt compromised. If you set about marketing your business and it leads to success, then you might risk encountering that old danger of having and finding no compassion for yourself. And you might no longer be compromised by not having enough work." Lawrence said, "You know, something in me says you're right. I mean, it still feels strange to market myself, but I'm going to look into it." Well, over the next few months, Lawrence took to marketing his business and became fully booked. His therapist's compassionate stance towards Lawrence did not change throughout. Lawrence was able to tolerate his fear of losing compassion while operating at full strength. Over time, he grew to find it safer to live from a strengthened position without as much fear of losing needed compassion. Well, Lawrence and others like him illustrate how therapy allows scapegoat survivors to learn that they can live without being hooked up to that terrible compassion machine I described earlier. They get to gradually discover that they can stand fully upright in their lives without sacrificing or losing needed compassion. It can be a long process, but I think well worth it. Well, I hope today's video was helpful in shining a light on this kind of dynamic that can be and feel very thwarting and in the way of feeling like you get to live your life at full strength. And with that, I just want to, again, thank everyone for your continued engagement, support, and participation with this channel and the resources that surround it. And with that, I look forward to posting again next Friday. Take care.